Hey y'all, my name is Karen Strong, and I'm the author of Just South of Home and my latest novel, Eden's Everdark. Now, a lot of people ask me what Eden is about, and it's many things. It's suspenseful, it's atmospheric, and has Southern Gothic vibes. But also, it is a story about a girl who is dealing with her mother's recent death. Eden and her father are going to visit Safina Island, which is off the coast of Georgia. And this is where Eden is going to meet her mother's side of the family for the very first time. And when Eden is in her mother's old room, she uncovers one of her sketchbooks. And inside that sketchbook are very creepy drawings of a place that her mother called Everdark. And Eden is drawn to this darkness as well. Later on, she follows a black cat in the woods and she walks through a slash of darkness. And she is now on a moonless beach and she meets a very terrifying and very beautiful witch who wants Eden to be her eternal daughter. Now, will Eden be able to defeat this witch and make it back to the world of living? Well, you'll have to read Eden's Everdark to find out. In the meantime, I'm going to read from a chapter titled The Sketchbook. Eden unpacked her clothes, putting them in a small chest of drawers. On the nightstand, she propped her mother's photograph against the ceramic pot of an aloe vera plant. Touching its fleshy leaves and tiny spikes, she thought of the succulents in her bedroom back in Maryland. She peered into a tiny closet, which was filled with extra pillows, dusty quilts, and several old boxes. The strong smell of mothballs filled up her nose, and she let out a tiny sneeze. Eden wondered if there was a chance that some of her mother's things were in any of these boxes, abandoned and then forgotten when she left for the mainland so many years ago. Stretching up on her tiptoes, she reached for the boxes on the closet shelf and cradled them in her arms. Eden sat cross-legged on the warm wood floor. She shuffled through the first box and found old photographs and papers. Eden stared at the sepia images of family she hadn't known but recognized. The Gardner genes were strong. Dark brown skin, eyes that tilted up at the corners, full lips, and sharp cheekbones. Eden shared all these traits with the women and men in these photographs. She closely examined each of them, but there were none of her mother. The last box she opened was full of sketchbooks, and Eden instantly recognized her mother's style. This is what she had hoped to find. Eden's mother had published 2 books of botanical art, and Eden used to accompany her to bookstores all over Maryland where she would sign copies for patrons. These sketchbooks belonged to a girl who was still burgeoning in her craft, which only made Eden love them more because the drawings weren't polished and perfect. She opened sketchbook after sketchbook and admired the art inside. Her mother had drawn island flowers, indigenous plants, and various herbs. She found sketchbooks with meadows filled with seagrass and pennywort, salt marshes dense with cordgrass. But there were also other drawings of ghost crabs, ibis birds, and sea turtles. Her mother's love of all living things was evident in these sketchbooks. Eden finally came upon the last sketchbook at the bottom of the box. It was smaller than the others, bent and warped, with a sandblasted cover. These pages revealed charcoal drawings of bleak beaches, stormy oceans, and night skies. Old, wrinkled hands reaching out from a dark hallway, a mansion covered in roots and leaves, nightscapes of live oaks dripping in Spanish moss. Eden stared at the sketch of a black cat lurking on a seashell path. She turned the page to find a large bird with sharp claws and the silhouette of a full moon. The next page had a monstrous dog with an open mouth and revealed dagger-sharp teeth. These drawings filled Eden with a morbid familiarity, as if her mother had drawn a dark mirror of Safina Island. Eden continued to explore the pages. There were watercolor sketches of children with dark skin, not brown like her own, but deep indigo and flecked with tiny silver stars. Girls in high-necked dresses with long pearl necklaces, bare-chested boys who held fishing nets full of intricate knots and loops. They all had white, bright eyes, but their mouths were frozen in internal screams. The last page of the sketchbook contained drawings of a beautiful woman. Like the children, she had shimmering indigo skin and bright eyes. Her hair was windblown, a dark cotton cloud against her white flowing dress. Her long, sharp nails were painted black. At the bottom of the last sketch were tiny blocked words, The Witch of Everdark. Eden put all the sketchbooks back in the box, except for the one full of creepy landscapes, cursed children, and drawings of the beautiful witch. Knitting her brows, Eden wasn't sure why she felt compelled to keep it. The sketchbook had shown that her mother had an affinity for darkness, a stark contrast to the bright botanical style that Eden had always known. At times, Eden's grief felt like a shroud of eternal night, just like the world her mother had created in those pages. Maybe the drawings had spoken to the deepest part of her despair. Eden realized that she was also attracted to this darkness too. The sketchbook was now also another mystery. Why had her mother drawn such morbid images? Eden felt a tug that wanted to reveal more truth. A faint recognition hummed inside her. She placed the sketchbook on the nightstand next to her mother's photograph, and she opened the curtains to stare out the window. The woods were murky, and the full moon splashed shadows among the trees. Eden had never dreaded the dark. At bedtime, her mother would tuck her in tight and tell her stories of princesses, star catchers, and mermaids. Her mother would kiss her forehead before turning off the light, and Eden would drift off into a happy sleep. There were no fears of monsters in closets or goblins under the bed. Eden closed the curtains. Her mother's gloomy world twisted around in her mind as she changed into her pajamas, and the sketchbook's nightscapes whirled like wisps of lost memories when she turned off the light, pulled the quilt over her head, and faded off to sleep. But then a nightmare bolted her awake. Eden stumbled out of bed quickly, turning on the lamp on the nightstand. Slowly, she revisited the slivers of the dream. She had been on a beach with black sand, a stormy ocean churned under a moonless sky full of stars. The beautiful woman from the sketchbook appeared, wearing a dress that floated around her as if she were underwater. But then the woman gripped Eden's shoulder, and sharp nails sank painfully into her skin. The Witch of Everdark bent down and whispered in Eden's ear, "Been too long since a bright girl come here." The witch had been vivid and terrifying, and Eden shivered away the memory of the nightmare. It was just a dream, she thought. It wasn't real. When her pulse lost its panic and returned to its normal speed, Eden carefully got back into bed, but she didn't turn off the light. She held the quilt tight under her chin. Sleep wasn't coming anytime soon. So that was an excerpt from a chapter titled The Sketchbook. I hope that you enjoyed listening. And if you want to find out what happens to Eden and the witch, you have to read Eden's Everdark. Thank you so much, y'all, for listening. Happy reading.